For years, the television landscape was dominated by figures of absolute certainty, but few individuals commanded the screen with the quiet, imposing authority of Tia Torres. To the millions of viewers who tuned in week after week, she felt entirely invincible, a monolithic force operating within the chaotic fringes of animal rescue. She was the woman who could step directly into the crosshairs of human volatility and canine desperation, only to emerge completely unshaken. The television is a medium built on the selective amplification of strength, often editing out the slow, grinding erosion that occurs when the cameras stop rolling. Behind that carefully packaged image of unwavering resilience, deep institutional fractures were quietly webbing through her life and rescue organization. The ultimate conclusion of her broadcasting era did not arrive with a grand retrospective or celebratory applause, but rather slipped away in a corporate whisper. It was an ending that felt entirely incongruous with the loud, high-stakes drama that had defined her public existence for more than a decade. To truly comprehend how this quiet conclusion reshaped her reality, one must look past the reality television phenomenon and examine the long history of survival that preceded it. Long before a network production crew ever stepped foot onto her property, Tia Torres was already intimately acquainted with battles that lacked an audience or a steady paycheck. Born in Southern California during the turbulent dawn of the 1960s, her early existence was defined by a profound lack of structural stability. When her biological parents separated during her formative years, it was her stepmother who stepped into the void, becoming the singular, disciplined anchor of her childhood. In their household, financial resources were a constant anxiety, and physical security was a fragile luxury rather than a guaranteed right. Yet within this environment of persistent scarcity, she absorbed a brutal utilitarian philosophy of self-reliance that would govern the rest of her life. If a system or a structure broke, you did not wait for an authority figure to intervene, you figured out how to patch together yourself. When the human world felt volatile, unpredictable, or withholding, animals became her emotional sanctuary and her most reliable companions. A Catahoula leopard dog named Cougar eventually became her fiercest protector, teaching her that loyalty was not a verbal promise but an instinctual, unwavering commitment. As her childhood gave way to adolescence, her domestic menagerie expanded to include horses, goats, and a revolving door of discarded stray dogs that filled the emotional gaps left by human inconsistency. By the time she reached the age of 17, she made a definitive choice that would permanently crystallize her fiercely independent trajectory. She packed up her meager belongings, gathered her animals, and walked away from her childhood home in search of something resembling autonomy. This departure was not born out of a cliché teenage rebellion, but rather out of a desperate, pragmatic pursuit of personal sovereignty. For a significant period, her daily survival was a nomadic exercise, sleeping in the backs of trucks and transient trailers while keeping her animals fed. There was no affluent safety net waiting to catch her if she miscalculated, and those lean, unforgiving years hardened her exterior without curdling into cynicism. Seeking structure, she enlisted in the military, an experience that pounded a sense of rigid discipline into her worldview. Later, she found work driving commercial trucks before shifting her focus toward mentoring deeply troubled gang members in Los Angeles. It was during her time working with these marginalized youths that she began noticing profound systemic parallels that most conventional observers completely overlooked. She saw the exact same cycles of early abandonment, societal neglect, and knee-jerk misjudgment in these young men that she would later recognize in abused dogs. The definitive turning point in her life occurred inside a sterile Los Angeles shelter when she stood face-to-face with a severely scarred brindle pit bull. This animal had been confiscated from a highly violent environment, yet when introduced to her young daughters, it displayed an astonishing, gentle restraint. Where the rest of the world saw an irredeemable monster engineered for malice, she recognized a mirror of her own survival instinct and untapped potential. That single encounter laid the conceptual bricks for what would eventually become the Villalobos Rescue Center, an institution founded on mutual redemption. However, when you construct an empire entirely out of raw survival mechanisms, you're permanently operating on the precipice of logistical and financial exhaustion. The subsequent arrival of media fame brought an intense, double-edged spotlight that applied immense pressure to an already strained infrastructure. What began as a localized profile in a Los Angeles magazine was never intended to launch a sprawling multi-season reality television franchise. It was simply a human interest piece highlighting an unconventional woman who was offering second chances to society's two most feared entities, pit bulls and parolees. Yet the narrative caught the attention of television producers who recognized that this environment possessed the holy grail of modern programming: authentic conflict and systemic redemption. She initially hesitated to sign a contract, fully aware that production demands could easily compromise the daily, delicate safety of her rescue work. Ultimately, it was a matter of basic arithmetic. Donations were cratering, veterinary debts were skyrocketing, and local municipal regulations were suffocating her facility. She did not invite the cameras into her life out of a desire for vanity, but because she desperately needed a financial life raft to keep her mission afloat. When the docuseries finally debuted on Animal Planet, its raw, unfiltered look at systemic brokenness resonated instantly with a massive global audience. Viewers were transfixed by the sight of powerful dogs being liberated from heavy logging chains and underground fighting syndicates by individuals who knew exactly what it felt like to be discarded. The show successfully dismantled the prevailing cultural myth that certain living beings are born inherently evil or entirely beyond the scope of rehabilitation. We watched her biological daughters, Tania and Mariah, alongside her adopted sons, Kanani and Moe, work with an intensity that blurred the line between family and staff. The underlying thesis of the broadcast was simple yet radical. Second chances are not a finite resource to be hoarded, but a necessity that must be extended to the unloved. As the seasons rolled on, however, the narrative arc of the show had to expand to document the suffocating administrative weight of managing such an enterprise. Behind the triumphant background music of the episodes, a bureaucratic war was raging with California zoning boards and animal control regulators. Kennel licensing became an endless nightmare of red tape, and the sheer cost of real estate made local expansion an absolute impossibility. Realizing that the California infrastructure was on the verge of collapsing under its own weight, she made the agonizing decision to uproot her life. Moving more than 200 high-risk dogs across state lines to Louisiana was not some romantic creative choice for a season finale. It was an absolute logistical nightmare. It required endless convoys of retrofitted vehicles, grueling cross-country drives, temporary holding facilities, and precise medical coordination. When the final caravan of exhausted handlers and barking dogs arrived in New Orleans on New Year's Day, it marked a monumentally expensive new chapter. Louisiana offered fewer immediate regulatory hurdles and vast physical space, but it instantly introduced an entirely fresh set of geographically unique financial liabilities. The Crescent City brought torrential downpours, devastating hurricanes, and a tropical climate that caused building materials to rot and decay at an accelerated rate. Storm damage frequently required immediate massive capital injections to rebuild shattered fences and flooded kennels, draining resources that should have gone toward animal care. Yet through all of these environmental setbacks, the television production continued to march forward, projecting an image of total indomitable resilience. What the average viewer watching at home failed to grasp was the extent to which the rescue had become codependent on network checks. The massive monthly overhead, comprising premium dog food, specialized veterinary surgeries and competitive wages for a specialized staff, was intrinsically tied to a corporate filming schedule. The rescue had unknowingly integrated itself into a fragile media ecosystem that required constant public visibility to maintain its internal stability. As anyone who has ever operated within the entertainment industry knows, those corporate lifelines can be severed without a single moment of sentimentality. Even as the television revenue kept the lights on, the true fractures within her world began manifest through interpersonal betrayal rather than financial shortfalls. One of the most emotionally devastating blows of her career did not originate from an anonymous city bureaucrat or a Category 4 hurricane. It came from a rescue couple operating out of Michigan, whom she had publicly championed, mentored, and integrated into her professional network. This duo ran an organization called Pit Stop for Change, gaining widespread media acclaim for taking on dogs deemed too dangerous for standard adoption. Seeing a reflection of her younger self in their apparent dedication, she extended her platform, helped them generate significant donations, and offered institutional support. The relationship eventually deepened to the point where the couple relocated their operations to Louisiana, working out of a facility established through her direct backing. It was a partnership built on mutual trust, but it was destined to dissolve into an unprecedented legal and ethical disaster. According to detailed accounts later shared by the family, this celebrated partnership rapidly deteriorated into a horrific situation involving animal hoarding. As tensions between the two entities reached a boiling point, she alleged that the couple completely barricaded themselves inside the subsidized facility. When the compound was finally secured and reclaimed, she described entering a scene of utter devastation, discovering dead animals left behind in hidden areas. She would later publicly describe the aftermath of their tenure as a literal trail of death that shattered her ability to trust outside operators. The couple abruptly fled Louisiana, returning to Michigan while retaining custody of a significant number of vulnerable dogs. Not long after their departure, Michigan law enforcement authorities investigated an animal welfare complaint and discovered a horrific scene involving a sweltering rental truck. Confined inside that vehicle in oppressive summer heat were multiple emaciated, severely dehydrated dogs, leading to immediate criminal charges for animal cruelty and weapons violations. Yet rather than fading quietly into the legal system, the accused couple launched an aggressive public relations counteroffensive aimed directly at her reputation. Their defense attorney publicly accused her of orchestrating a calculated media smear campaign designed to manipulate local prosecutors and generate dramatic television ratings. They argued that the poor condition of the seized dogs was the result of past rescues, vehemently denying any personal negligence or intentional abuse. The legal warfare escalated when they slapped her, and Villalobos with a massive civil lawsuit claiming severe emotional distress and disputing animal ownership. For over a year, strict court mandates legally gagged her from defending herself or speaking publicly about the horrific details of the ongoing case. The defense fees quickly spiraled into a six-figure financial black hole, forcing the rescue to liquidate essential equipment just to keep lawyers on retainer. By the time the courts finally dismissed the lawsuit, the overriding sentiment within the compound was not one of triumphant vindication, but of absolute exhaustion. Part 2, the conclusion of her long-running television career, did not arrive with a highly publicized farewell campaign or a dramatic retrospective episode. There were no emotional close-ups designed to give the audience a sense of narrative closure, nor was there a marketing push to honor a decade of broadcasting history. Instead, the show was quietly excised from the network's future lineup during a period of massive corporate-driven restructuring. Major media mergers had fundamentally shifted the parent network's internal programming priorities, favoring cheap, trendy content over long-running, expensive documentary series. After 19 seasons of consistent performance, the series simply ceased to exist on the weekly schedule, leaving millions of loyal viewers entirely in the dark. For the dedicated fanbase that had invested years of emotional energy into the rescue's journey, this sudden radio silence felt incredibly jarring. But for the family operating the facility, the cancellation represented a destabilizing economic event that threatened the very survival of their animals. To understand the gravity of this shift, one must recognize that the show had evolved far beyond a simple entertainment vehicle. It was core infrastructure. The television cameras provided a massive, free global advertising platform that translated into a steady stream of individual donations and corporate sponsorships. Running a sanctuary that provides housing, food, and medical care for hundreds of powerful high-energy dogs is a monumentally expensive logistical reality. The network's decision to shift its creative direction does not magically cause veterinary corporations to forgive outstanding medical balances or offer free pharmaceuticals. The massive commercial trucks that delivered pallets of premium kibble every single week did not pause their billing cycles out of sympathy. The weekly payroll obligations for the handlers who kept the facility safe and clean remained entirely unchanged despite the absence of production stipends. When that steady entertainment revenue stream abruptly evaporated, she was forced to completely recalculate her entire operational budget within a matter of days. To compound this immense structural stress, the cancellation coincided with a global pandemic that was systematically crippling economies around the world. Regular donors, suddenly facing historic inflation and widespread employment instability, were forced to drastically scale back or entirely eliminate their charitable contributions. At the exact same time, the baseline cost of running an animal sanctuary experienced an unprecedented sharp upward trajectory across the country. Simple cleaning supplies, commercial-grade disinfectants, and basic kennel maintenance materials became both prohibitively expensive and incredibly difficult to source due to supply chain failures. Veterinary clinics, facing their own staffing crises, raised their prices for surgeries and medications while significantly reducing their operational hours. The rescue found itself trapped in a financial vice grip, where every single line item of expenditure was expanding while their primary income channels were narrowing. It was not an explosive single-day collapse that made headlines, but rather a slow, suffocating strain that tested the absolute limits of their endurance. In a desperate bid to adapt to this unforgiving new media landscape, she attempted to reclaim control of her distribution channels through digital innovation. She entered into a partnership with an outside media company to launch an independent, subscription-based streaming network named Rabid Reality. The underlying business model was elegantly straightforward: bypass the traditional television gatekeepers and charge loyal fans a small monthly fee for exclusive, unfiltered rescue content. If successful, this platform would provide an independent financial cushion that could completely insulate the rescue from the unpredictable whims of corporate network executives. During the initial launch phase, public enthusiasm was incredibly high, with thousands of dedicated supporters eagerly entering their credit card information to fund the mission. However, the technological infrastructure undergirding the platform proved to be completely unequipped to handle the immediate influx of digital traffic. Within weeks of the launch, subscribers began encountering an endless barrage of frustrating technical glitches, including persistent login failures and broken video players. This technical incompetence quickly eroded the hard-earned goodwill of her base, turning enthusiastic supporters into frustrated consumers demanding immediate technical support. Behind the curtain, deep creative and financial disagreements began fracturing the relationship between her and the corporate tech partners managing the backend. The digital venture quickly devolved into an administrative nightmare, forcing them to shut down the entire platform less than a year after its grand premiere. Every single subscription fee had to be painstakingly refunded, transforming a potential financial savior into a deeply demoralizing, highly publicized failure. During this exact period of public professional setbacks, The family was also forced to navigate profound, intensely stressful personal health crises away from the public eye. An earlier season of the television show had briefly documented her son Kanani's near-fatal motorcycle accident, which resulted in emergency surgeries and intensive care. While he eventually defied the medical odds and returned to active duty at the kennels, his lengthy recovery process cast a long shadow over the family. The terrifying reality of almost losing a child, combined with the ruinous legal battles from the Michigan rescue case, created a perfect storm of exhaustion. The cumulative weight of these simultaneous crises meant that every single day was an exercise in crisis management rather than forward planning. Yet despite the cancellations, the technical failures, the legal draining of funds, and the internal family stress, the baseline reality of the rescue never shifted. The hundreds of dogs resting in those New Orleans kennels still required feeding, medication, and human interaction every single morning without exception. That quiet, unyielding daily responsibility does not pause its clock because your television contract was terminated or your streaming app crashed. This specific era of her life was characterized by a heartbreaking form of pressure that is unique to those who refuse to quit. It is the exhaustion that accumulates when you realize that your success has made you entirely responsible for the lives of hundreds of